Welcome back to another episode of The Conscious Artist, a safe space for conversations around mental health awareness for musicians, artists, and all human beings. I am your host, Pallavi Mahidara. I'm a concert pianist and teacher, and I am absolutely thrilled that you are joining us today. My hope for this show is that it will give all of us a sense of solidarity and knowledge that we are not alone, and together, through these conversations, we can create more awareness and change for a healthier future. I am eager to dive into today's conversation. Currently serving on the board of Piano Arts of Wisconsin, today's guest is a music enthusiast who has spent his entire career supporting young classical musicians. He is a vice president with TKO Miller and has experience as a pianist and chamber musician, and works to promote the future of classical music, which is exactly what today's topic is about. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming George Apfelbach to The Conscious Artist. George, I'm so excited to have you here with us today.
Thank you. Very excited to join you and happy to dive into conversation with you.
It's my pleasure, and I can't wait to get into it. We began speaking about this topic a few months ago when I came to perform in Milwaukee, and it is such a relevant conversation in our industry. And I knew that I needed to do a podcast episode about this topic. Every conversation that I have with people, whether they are artists or music lovers, every conversation always ends up with the same kind of frustrating question. How do we get more people to come to classical music concerts? And I was in Geneva, Switzerland a few weeks ago, attending a music gathering, a summer music gathering, where I was invited to give a workshop on mental health awareness and be part of a roundtable discussion about the music industry. And I had many conversations with the other guests in my short 2 days there, but one recurring theme was exactly this: how the classical music world has changed in so many ways, and in other ways has remained stubbornly planted in the ground. So to start us off, I'd love to know sort of your thoughts, firstly, about how we can try and get more people to come to classical music concerts and how we can sort of bring classical music to the people.
Sure. Yeah, I spend a lot of time thinking about this topic as well. And as you mentioned, as a board member for Piano Arts, I'm working constantly with young classical musicians who are looking into the future and trying to understand, is this really a viable career path for me? I have such passion, I have such skill. How do I actually use that to share the gift and the joy and the passion that I have with everybody else in the world who wants this? And it is sometimes, can be overwhelming to, see the audiences at, the Milwaukee Symphony here. I remember when I was a kid was full, every single concert, packed house. And now you go, even on opening weekend, it might be half the seats empty. So there is certainly a shift in, I don't want to call it the appreciation, but certainly the attendance of classical music, and especially for young musicians who are trying to launch their career and get started. One of the strange dynamics that you see, but now with the emergence of, YouTube and content that's available, a lot of the big famous names that have a lot of content are more or less dominating a lot of the classical music consumption. You think about, a Spotify playlist that's curated for classical music. Well, oftentimes it's nothing new. It's the very well-known pieces. And so for someone to try and stamp out and create their own path forward can be, a little bit overwhelming. On one sense, you want to have and play and perform the well-known music, but that might not be what you love and the gift that you really want to share. So it is kind of a unique question. And how do you do that? I think, Pallavi, when we spoke, I shared a story with you about really what turned my attention and love for classical music into something that I knew I wanted to do for a long time. And actually, part of the reason I'm involved with Piano Arts is because Piano Arts was really that defining moment in my life. I don't think it was the year that you were performing. I think it was a couple of years earlier, but my grandmother took me and my cousins. She was very proud to have us in her convertible to take us to the Piano Arts competition. And I was maybe 9 or 10 years old. And we were watching, 14, 15, 16-year-old pianists playing with the Milwaukee Symphony. And I remember sitting in that audience. I'd never seen anything like that before. It was someone that was my age, that was, or at least a close in age to me, doing something that I said, wow, maybe I can do that. It wasn't some rock star on MTV that, you have no access to through a music video. It was truly a superstar in person on stage. And I just thought to myself, wow, this is possible. that moment, as you start to develop as a musician, you start to, explore these themes and these thoughts within music. And that's the process of classical music. And I think the side of the equation that a lot of people, coming and attending and appreciating music don't necessarily appreciate. And where I'm going with this is that you can look at pop music. Taylor Swift, she sells out stadiums. Well, the music is, it's not that it's, again, nothing, I like Taylor Swift's music, but I don't think that the music by itself stands alone with the emotional depth and breadth of what classical music can offer. And so what makes it so much different and so much more appealing, I think one is that it's, it's a little bit shorter, but truly the lyrics on top of it tell you exactly what you're supposed to feel or know about what is being communicated. And yes, there's a melody, it's a vocal performance, and there's music behind it. But why is it that that becomes such a dominant, attraction to people who can say they appreciate music or love music today? To tie that back to what I was saying before is that as a classical musician, going through and developing and understanding how you want to communicate something, how you have agency over your own emotions, over your own feelings, over your own experience that you're putting into an interpretation of a brilliant composer several hundred years ago, is, I think, a side that needs to be shared or at least communicated better with audiences today. You want to have these experiences, but people want to understand it. So I think that there's a little bit of a bridge that needs to be closed here to try and meet the audience where they are. I think what's happened is as the audience has aged and as the directors of a lot of these music programs have aged, they've missed the kind of undercurrent of the mass consumption of music and content, and has not really had an opportunity to explore how do we really put this in a way that's meaningful to someone who might even just be a little bit interested, but don't really know what the resources are, or understand how to actually engage with this type of music. Because I do know that there's appeal. There's people listen to classical music, as I mentioned, and for example, on a Spotify thing while they're studying, while they're relaxing, while they're doing whatever. But the sole purpose of that isn't to enjoy it, it's to kind of put you into a mood or relaxing. But that's just one aspect. That might be what you're looking for. I enjoy music that's relaxing and I want to go experience that. Some people, they don't know that, hey, there's really exciting, there's really romantic, there's really sad, there's really, loving and passionate music out there. And finding a way to share that, or just, hear even across different eras or composers, you can kind of show that there's these different interpretations of the same emotion across eras. It's truly timeless, which is why it's still relevant today. And providing that sort of access is something that I think needs to have a little bit more attention now.
Wow, thank you so much for sharing all these thoughts. There's really so much to unpack here, and you've covered a lot of points that I actually really want to talk about in detail. I want to go back, first of all, to the point about getting the interest of classical music to become part of everyone's daily life. And I mean, I have a theory. So, first of all, there was a period of time, a couple hundred years ago, even 100 years ago, where classical music was the popular music of everyone's daily life. Most people were amateur musicians. A lot of people played instruments, and the people that went to concerts were, in fact, amateur musicians who knew the music that they were listening to. And I think, again, this is just my theory, but I think that the reason that decades ago, artists and presenters, they didn't need to chase audiences to come to their concerts, again, because classical music was part of everyday life. So people would line up to buy tickets, and, they would sell out concerts of Horowitz and Rubinstein extremely quickly. And that was just with a simple newspaper or radio announcement. And then in today's world, classical music ends up feeling like an ancient dinosaur for most people that use a streaming service. Like the idea of like going to, quote unquote, the symphony hall, or, the orchestra hall or the concert hall. It's like a very antiquated and elite concept for a lot of people. I'm not saying it should be, I'm not saying it is for those of us in the classical music world, but to the outside world, it seems like that. And music has also evolved from classical music through jazz, rock, hip hop, rap, pop music. And the music itself has evolved to where we are today. And so I honestly feel like we cannot just stubbornly sit in our homes or in our offices waiting for people to buy tickets anymore. We have to find ways to bring music to the people. And that's exactly what you were talking about when you were sharing your thoughts just now, because we need to create an experience for the concert goers. Exactly like you're saying, we need to figure out ways to entice them to come and to let them know that they don't need to understand anything about music to feel music. And that I think is a really important point. You don't need to understand to feel.
Yeah. No, I think, this, it opens up kind of a broader discussion point about how the current audience for classical music concerts right now are people who probably aren't spending a lot of time on digital media, on social media, who are not, necessarily interested in pulling something up on YouTube. And so that is their method of consuming classical music. And unfortunately, I think symphony directors and most groups are catering to their audience. And so there hasn't been a need to expand the reach of, say, the Milwaukee Symphony, because they know who their people are. They know who their donors are. They know who's buying tickets. They know how to reach them. And so that's been kind of the business side of it, is how do we get the people who have been coming to keep coming back? And there's no fault to that, but it's also because, social media, pop musicians now who got famous because of TikTok,
Exactly.
because they posted a song every single day and one day it went viral, and now they have a North American tour. And that the emergence of that sort of access to new audiences is happened very, very, very quickly. And so it's understandable that it can be missed, especially in something, classical music does have a tradition. It does have an endurance behind it, and putting something into, a new, it's a very conservative culture. At the end of the day, it's not to the fault of anybody who's been running this, because it has changed so quickly. But it would have made sense if the young people who are already there were, almost demanding from the Milwaukee Symphony to put content out to keep them engaged. But now you're fighting over new engagement. It's not just about the music, as you mentioned as well. It's about the experience. It's about bringing it out of the concert so that when you go, it enhances your understanding and your engagement already. The concert's the last step.
Yeah.
You get really excited when you buy the tickets. That's part of the experience. Part of it is knowing what you're going to have. Who am I seeing? Why are they relevant? What is it about this entire ecosystem of classical music and emotional exploration of finding this meaningful moment while you're seeing something live? I mean, it's so much more powerful to experience music in person. That's why people go to concerts.
Yeah.
It's more an extension of making it kind of that final climax of the experience, but we seem to believe that it starts there. That's kind of been this historical how it worked, is that, okay, here's the concert, that's the climax, that's it. Then you go after and you love it, and now maybe you'll buy CDs, and now you'll love this artist and you'll love this whatever. And at some point it was that. I mean, think about I would give anything to see some of the debut concerts of Beethoven, right? And because you don't know what's coming, you don't know that's what's really exciting for a lot of new people who don't have experience. It's truly a debut performance for them. I mean, imagine that. Some of the greatest pieces in the entire world are still untapped in the minds and the hearts and the lives of so many people, that it caused quite a stir at the time. I believe that it still will now. I mean, this is a new world. Yes, you can go and listen to it and watch it on YouTube or whatever, but it's not just the music. It's this exciting experience that you get to do and experience for the first time. It's not something that you hear every day on the radio over and over and over again, and you know all the words, and it gets old. I mean, I can't tell you what the number one pop single was 6 months ago. I'm sure I heard it 2,500 times.
But also, I will say that the trajectory in pop music is very fast. The turnover is extremely fast. And so people are constantly trying to keep up with the trends. Whereas I think for a lot of people who don't know about classical music or are not at all versed in classical music, it feels like, oh, the music is all the same. I think people have perhaps this idea that there's like just a few composers or a few kind of standard pieces and that's it.
Right. I agree with you. I think that part of that also is, I keep going back to this, a Spotify playlist for relaxation, Claire de Lune, Moonlight Sonata, Fur-Elise, maybe some nocturnes in there. And it's not the entire repertoire of what's possible. I mean, I'm a novice still when it comes to that. And I think I have a pretty great understanding of what's out there, but still, I would consider myself even a mainstream classical music consumer, but it's what I listen to all day, every day. To me, even going and seeing something for the first time is exciting. You don't know when it's going to end. You don't know what's going to happen next. It's not like reading a book where it's, oh, there's 10 pages left, something big is going to happen because I know where we are in the story. You don't know that. You have to let yourself experience it in time as it's being performed, because that's the only time that it exists.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And something that I find very interesting is how certain things are coming back into fashion. For example, LPs are starting to come back into fashion. People are buying LPs again. And I think at some point, maybe CDs will come back into fashion. But I mention this specifically because a very good friend of mine, who's not a musician at all, doesn't know much about classical music, posted on his stories Beethoven Fifth Symphony, and it was an LP. And I immediately responded to the story asking who was the orchestra, who was the conductor. And he wrote back and he said, "You make me very happy. When I showed my friends, no one cared. But I love the sound. I love how articulated and passionate it comes out. I can feel it. It pumps me up."
Mm.
And I just thought, like, how incredible is this? And I've known this person for a long time. I know that he appreciates music because he's also told me that about my performances. So I do know that he is someone that actually has an appreciation, even if he has zero understanding. And I said to him, I said, this is exactly what classical music is all about. You don't need to know or understand anything to feel. And I thanked him for sharing this and expressing this. And going back to, creating sort of an experience for a concert goer, I think what a lot of both classical musicians, but also agencies, presenters, managements, I think everyone is afraid of the risk of selling out. I think this is a big concern always.
Mm.
How do we
Hmm.
avoid selling out, but still getting people interested and like finding new innovative ways? Because on one hand, the music world has changed so much with the influx of social media. On the other hand, classical music like really stubbornly wants to stay planted in the earth and in the ground, the classical music concept and world. So I think we need to find ways that we can adapt without feeling like we're selling out. And as I said, like the world has changed, the music world has changed, like we must evolve with it. And I want to mention two concert series that I have in mind that give their audiences a fully immersive experience. One of them is the Washington Arts Ensemble in Washington, D.C., which is co founded by one of my closest friends, Natalia Kazarian, who actually was a guest here on the podcast in season 2. And the other is Tertulia Chamber Music Series, run by my wonderful friend and colleague, James Austin Smith. And both series find very innovative ways to invite the audience into a unique and immersive experience. With the Washington Arts Ensemble, guests have the chance to speak to their artists before and after the performance. And during that time, they also get to enjoy some drinks, some food, some refreshments. In the Tertulia concerts, their whole concept, which I was, by the way, I got to participate in their chamber music series back in January in Reykjavik, Iceland. And the thing I absolutely adored was the way that they bring concerts to unusual settings. For example, restaurants, coffee shops, art galleries, and the food and the music are paired, never at the same time. And here is an example where there could have been a risk where, for example, they're bringing the music to, let's say, a restaurant, but then it becomes background music. But no, the way they do it is that they pair each course with a musical course. So you get to have your appetizer and then you have the musical appetizer. And while you're listening to the music, there is no food served, there is no drink served, and it's silent in a good way, not like
Yeah.
just the way in the concert halls. And so this way, the listener gets to be fully present for every experience that they're having.
Hmm. That's interesting. I don't want to change the subject, but I'd be curious, on your end, do you experience pressures to, you said selling out. I mean, are there pressures or opportunities where you actually consider like, this might be a little bit beyond my comfort zone in term, with respect to the sincerity or tradition that classical music actually has in your life or in your career path?
Well, I think maybe perhaps I should rephrase what I said because I think it's actually not fair of me to use the phrase selling out because my concept of selling out would be, for example, I don't know, maybe to do like crossover stuff that gets people feeling like they're going to like a half rock, half pop concert,
Sure.
as an
Okay.
example. But I think that's not actually fair to say because I know a number of incredible classical musicians that love crossing over and do it
Yeah.
extremely well and bring that to their classical music concerts. They intersperse. So I do want to take that back and sort of say, how can we remain true, each individual artist? How can each individual artist remain true to themselves and still find ways to adapt and evolve with the times?
Yeah, I'm glad you clarified that because I think that's what you're describing is I wouldn't call that selling out. It's just being true to yourself. I mean, you are truly a creator, right? People are interested in going to see the program, and building a program is very important through a season, through just through a specific concert. Having a program that makes sense is very important. But now, especially, and I think the way you put it is, how does a musician remain true to themselves? And I think sharing that part with an audience to the extent possible is something that has really, that's what's made contemporary rock stars, right? People have an understanding or think they have an understanding of what's going on in the life of this artist that I identify with. And then I can also experience in the music. Classical music exists kind of in this weird part of music, just from the perspective of an audience member. You spend hours practicing. You spend so much time developing skills and thinking about the music and putting it together and collaborating with other musicians as you're traveling. An audience member doesn't get to see any of that. And so maybe it's not obviously or inherently clear what your true personality is. And I think, yes, you can do that. You can develop yourself as a musician. I know that you love Brahms. You play Brahms very well, but part of it is because of who you are and staying true to yourself. I think engaging in that sort of dialogue and expressing expressing, oh, today this is my mood. This little clip is how I feel. How does it make you, something like that? I mean, it's getting beyond the concert stage that I think is allowed, or at least what has pulled a lot of people towards contemporary and pop music is because now, these celebrities have life outside of the stage.
Well, people get to see that life.
Right. There's so much more. It's like it's if you go back to this, how do you get people excited about the concert so that that becomes a climax? And the experience takes place before that. How do you engage with an audience ahead of time? Not just an hour or a day before, but so that someone knows you. Of course, someone who's seen you perform before is more likely to come back and see you. And I think that's kind of been the thought process of symphonies for hundreds of years. Is, oh yeah, well, people have seen us before. They should trust us that we're bringing in the great musicians and we're performing great music. But if that's all you're doing, it's not just about the music anymore. And we see that in other forms of music right now in terms of audience engagement, personal engagement, just general outreach and sharing. Here's me practicing. Here's why I think about this. This is my personality that is also true in my music that you get to experience with me and I get to share with you as a musician. I'm not just up here pushing buttons. I'm actually putting something of me that I experience day in and day out in my life and have for so long that now you know a little bit more about the personal side. And that way you still don't have to know anything about the music, but they know something about you and they know something about why. Why are you doing this? Why do you love this? There's such an opportunity now to engage with a mass audience of someone who's never, ever been or seen or experienced something like this before. The audience now, the mass market audience now that is so untapped is looking for that because it exists in other forms of music. And so it's not selling out, but it's saying, hey, this worked. I can still do this and be true to myself. And look how successful other musicians have been just in a different style or different form of music.
These are very important and very interesting points that you've made. And I definitely agree with you. once we're on stage or once we're getting our audiences there, how can we engage them? And that, I think, for example, being able to break that invisible wall between the artist and the audience, whether the artists get to speak with the audience before the concert or they introduce their program from the stage, as you're saying, that allows the audience to get to see the personality of the artist that they otherwise wouldn't get a chance to because we're playing an instrument. And Pallavi playing the piano is very different from Pallavi speaking.
Yeah.
It's me. It's always me, very authentically so, but they're just two very different aspects of my personality. So when we're on stage, that's already a way, and it's something that I love to do, and I champion it all the time. I do think that it's a really great way to help engage audiences and make them feel welcome, make them feel included in this experience. And I would say, like, a part B to that is also what you're saying about social media, which is to be able to engage them more online, where they get to see maybe behind the scenes. How do you practice? Or what's your day to day like? Or what is it like behind the scenes when you're traveling? What's your pre concert warm up routine or pre concert routine, right? Those are other aspects of kind of behind the scenes that help audience members get to know who is the person. Because ultimately, when we connect on a human to human level, we are more likely to feel invited and welcome in the situation.
Breaking down that not just the invisible wall on the stage, but that this is a normal person. This is someone who does this because they are exactly like me and the guy sitting next to me or the woman on the other side. I mean, we are all doing something and having a very human experience. We're not just being given something from on high. I mean, surely you could say the music is, but the actual performance in the setting is you, Pallavi. Yes, in that moment, you're the performer, but you're sharing a very human thing.
Yeah.
And so bringing that and kind of level setting that, I think, is also, it's important just in the human factor of what this music actually is. It is, in my opinion, the most human form of expression, and giving something from you as you're doing it in the moment is human. It's a human experience. And I think that, a lot of audiences, especially younger audience, kind of, I don't know if they sense that. I don't know if that's become, when they say they don't understand it, they don't understand what the human aspect. It's just, you go up, you listen, this person comes out. I don't know who they are. I don't really understand the music. I don't know. Are they a normal person? I don't know. And I don't think that's a difficult barrier to break down, but I think that is something that audiences struggle getting over and feeling included in what's actually happening.
Yeah. And for me, honestly, I am biased. Classical music is something that I can't live without. I feel this music coursing through my veins and pumping with every beat of my heart, as, cheesy as that sounds. But I truly believe that music is one of the purest forms of communication, and it's an exchange of energy through which both artist and audience experience this intangible and magical connection.
Absolutely.
For me as a human being, one of the things I value the most is human connection, whether it's in concert or getting to talk to people after the concert, or even here having conversations on my podcast. And so I think that we just need to find ways in order to draw the audience in and make them feel included in this whole experience, as we've been saying. And I want to go back to something that you said earlier. One thing that I don't know the solution to this for this issue, but while we can, for example, share our behind the scenes on social media, someone can post a practice video every day, which, by the way, there are many musicians that post their daily practice, have thousands or even hundreds of thousands of followers because their Instagram has exploded with people who actually want to watch their content. But the point is still the reach of classical music is far smaller than the reach of other genres, particularly pop. And I don't know if it has anything to do with the algorithms on social media, but I do feel like there is more of an algorithm push for certain types of video, certain types of music. Maybe that's completely false, but that's just my guess, based on the fact that, like, pop music has a far wider reach in the world percentage wise than classical music.
Yeah, I think there's something to that. The way I think those algorithms work is that they add fuel to a fire that's already there. frankly, classical music is not by itself a very strong burning fire at this point, but that doesn't mean that it needs to stay that way. As I mentioned with piano arts, we work with young musicians. Even I see it in our own organization, even appreciating the potential of what those algorithms can do, I think has changed and evolved so quickly that the classical music world still is slow to adapt. And it's very traditional, it's very conservative. And so the brand of classical music, I think, still is behind in the game of social media and understanding and unlocking that potential. And so, yes, it's a little bit slow going right now, but I think addressing that and finding ways to actually unlock that potential is still really an untapped market for expanding the reach and the understanding and sharing what it is about classical music that has allowed it to endure centuries across continents, across times of peace and times of war, across different cultures. It's truly lasted the test of time across any variable you want to put into the world. And that it's done so for a reason.
It is a universal language. Music is a universal language. And the fact that classical music does not have, aside from vocal music, operas, instrumental music doesn't have words, right? But even vocal music, even operas, the way that the music speaks to us is so intense and so deep. The music speaks to the deepest parts and complexities of our own emotions.
Mm.
And that's why I think that if people allowed themselves to just experience classical music without needing to understand it, without needing to sit quietly and follow these rules. I mean,
Yeah.
I understand that classical music etiquette needs to also slightly relax in some ways. I feel that whatever we can do to help bring music to audiences, to bring the audiences in, to encourage them, to invite them, to include them, to break down that wall. I think whatever we can do from the artistic perspective, as artists, as presenters, as orchestras, as managers, as the professionals of this industry, I think it's part of our responsibility.
Oh yeah, I agree. Showing that that this experience it's unique. That's part of the experience, and I think communicating that isn't you're not breaking rules, but this is also it's part of that experience. You can truly think deeply and long and hard about what actually is happening here. Why was this such great music 100 years ago? What was happening culturally? Is our culture that different now that this music doesn't resonate with us? Of course not. It does. I can tell you it does to me.
Well, again, I think it does because music touches us in the deepest parts of our souls. Whether it's classical music, non classical music, pop, rock, it doesn't matter. But music is what speaks to us the most deeply. And I think with classical music, with any music, but particularly with classical music, the reason why we can have a shared experience, even if it's not the same experience, 100 years ago, 200 years ago, 300 years ago, and today, or today sitting in Milwaukee versus Madrid versus Hong Kong versus Canada versus South Africa. The reason we can have these shared experiences is because music is alive. I think a lot of people don't realize that classical music is probably the most alive of all. Or maybe that's just me being very, very biased.
No,
But
actually, this
I
actually
think it
let me.
really is.
Well, no, and it's true. One of the greatest examples are the Glenn Goldberg variation recordings and how that changed in his life. It's the same music, it's the same musician at different stages in his life and different. The more he's thought about this music and internalized this music, it's such different sound. It's so different, but both are equally beautiful. And to contextualize that and see that and understand how a performer develops over a lifetime is just even a snippet of how the music has developed over a lifetime, over its lifetime, which spans generations. It's not something that you just consume on a daily basis. It's something that ages, and it's something that resonates with you, and it stays with you because it becomes part of you when you experience it. This music changes me. It changes with me.
I love that. And I couldn't agree more. And, this is a constantly evolving conversation. I don't think any of us in the music world yet have found the most practical and most efficient and most beneficial solution. But I think we are all trying to find ways to ensure the enduring legacy of classical music in society. And I want to thank you, first of all, for being here, for being part of this conversation, for sharing your thoughts, and for being part of a necessary conversation and change for the music industry in what you do with piano arts. So thank you, George. Thank you for being here. Thank you for chatting with us. And I look forward to a lot of continued conversations about this.
Thank you, Pallavi. It was an absolute pleasure.
Thank you all so much for listening. I am truly grateful for the support from each and every one of you. If you would like to submit any questions or topics for us to address on the show, you can send us a message on our Instagram page @ConsciousArtistPodcast. Help us to spread more awareness by sharing this episode with your friends, your colleagues, your teachers, and your students. And don't forget to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Sending you all so much love and strength to tackle this week, and we'll see you next Monday for another episode of The Conscious Artist.